Welcome to Campus Consortium's EdTalks webinar series. Our presenters for today's session are Paul Fisher, Associate Chief Information Officer from Seton Hall University, James Shuttlesworth, Director of Network System and Infrastructure from Ursinus College, and Dr. Carl Horvath, President at Campus Consortium. We will take questions at the end of today's presentation. Please enter your questions into the chat box or questions pane in your Zoom control panel. Without further ado, please allow me to present Paul Fisher, James Shuttlesworth, and Dr. Carl Horvath. Over to you, Carl.
Thank you very much, Lily. Much appreciated. And welcome to everyone to our EdTalk webinar presentation today. We have over 120 attendees and registrants today, and we're happy to have you here. Our point of discussion is about identity and access management, and it's a hot topic today in education in general, and we're going to talk about being able to afford it, how to implement it, and the value and security it can bring your institution. Again, we have a lot of people in attendance. First of all, we have, I guess, institutions from across the country: Miami University, DePaul University, Ohio Northern University, Hamilton College, Loyola University. Looks like we have Chapman University, Gratz College, Franklin and Marshall College, Miami University, College of the Marshall Islands is in attendance, New Jersey Institute of Technology, St. Mary's. We have a few institutions from California in attendance. So I want to welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Also have a few vendors that have joined who cater to education. Prelude Solutions, nice to see you folks out there, and Apogee IT Services that I've worked with before in the past. So thanks all for attending, and let's get into it. I want to first say special thanks to our sponsor, Okta, Identity and Access Management Platform. They are the sponsors of today's webinar. And, they have quite a number of higher education customers that they work with, institutions across the country. And if you want to know more about them, happy to provide information. And also as a partner, we can help provide special rates for our members. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about Campus Consortium. So I'm Carl, I'm the president. I've been a long-time chief information officer in higher education, and recently came aboard to lead the Campus Consortium. Founded in 2003, the consortium has evolved to really cater to education and healthcare sectors. And the consortium is really intended to help access technology for nonprofits. And that means reducing the cost and the effort, because a lot of institutions do not have the money, especially in the face of the pandemic. Many institutions lost funding and cash resources for IT, as well as losing expertise. And so what the consortium does is try to support institutions in connections, in consulting, in information, in research. And also we try to sponsor some in-kind grants as well, all of which we can help you with and explain that to you. Happy to do that. I'd like to start out with a poll question to kick off today's presentation, and really would like the audience to participate in this poll. What methods do you utilize for managing student, faculty, and staff access today at your institution? Do you have a identity and access vendor now, or platform, or a system? Do you use a web-based homegrown solution? Do you use spreadsheets or email? And if you can just choose one or two or all of them, if that's what you use, that would be great. We would like to get a sense from the audience what your institution is doing around or using around identity and access management right now. So let me just move on to a little bit about background information about what we'll be covering today, just to orient folks back to the list of attendees we have today. We don't just have IT folks attending, but we do have folks from the finance area, from the academic area, from the student service area, as well as IT, but I would like to provide some understanding and basic information about what we'll cover today. We certainly do have a few CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers attending, and we'll certainly be touching on that aspect of identity management as we move through the presentation. So, why is identity and access management essential? Well, we've all gone through the pandemic. We've been at institutions where we've had to pivot in 1 week to a completely online environment, and that really brought to light the types of services and how we service our students, faculty, and staff, as well as the systems and information that wasn't online. And then there was a rush to get to that information and really post it. And before I move on, let me just share the results of our first poll here. Looks like most people, 46% who responded, do have some solution, a vendor solution. Well, 46%. And 39%, quite a bit, have a homegrown solution. And we'll talk about that. There's certainly advantages and disadvantages to each of these solutions. As a web-based homegrown solution because of the maintenance and security issues sometimes. Spreadsheets, email, and then there are other 27%. So kind of spread across the board there in those. I think it's more divided than I thought it would be between each area. So this is a good presentation to try to get folks a little bit more information about moving ahead to implement a solution. But again, the pandemic emphasized this kind of move to, really emphasis and support of through technology more so than before. Really accelerated as a CIO at the time. I know it accelerated a lot of the plans and initiatives I had in my IT strategic plan from say 3 to 5 years to let's do that right now because we need it. So we really had to pivot as far as providing these services and ensuring the institution could continue on, even in the face of not coming to campus. The other thing is that many students that attend institutions today really expect these kinds of services in the first place. Many of our students have grown up in a virtual or an online environment. They do banking, they do leisure, they do almost everything online. And so why shouldn't their education resources also be online or at least accessible through online access? And then, of course, this is a security factor, is that as we made a rush to get our information resources for, let's say, online instruction and administration access for our mobile workforce, that we really highlight the security aspect of it. We just can't put these resources out on the web. And we know about cybersecurity threats and that we really need to protect our information and the information of all our students and faculty and staff. So, what is identity and access management? Well, essentially, it's really around accessing information, accessing applications, and also creating a better user environment for your students, faculty, and staff. And really, it starts with kind of looking at the bigger picture workflow of your institution. How does it work? What are the business practices in your institution? And how do people get to the information, the data, the digital assets that they need to access? And is it easy or hard? And so, identity management really does help make sure that people only get to what they need. So it's easier on them. So they're just seeing what they need, but it's also more secure. So they don't have access to too much or more than they need. And so you really begin a project like this by doing a discussion, creating a discussion within your organization about how to create rules around accessing information and what that would look like. The applications should be available through an identity and access management system. So everything that you may have separate logins for can all be accessed through one authentication. And you can get to email, your learning management system, databases in the library, many other academic applications and administrative applications, all available through one authentication. And also, this really improves the usability of using these applications. It increases the efficiency of how people get to the resources they need to do their jobs every day, to study, and to communicate with each other. So who can use identity and access management? Well, yes, it was prohibitive years ago, it was difficult and expensive, but it's really evolved significantly over the past years. And so it is accessible, and it's accessible to higher ed, to K-12, to all nonprofit organizations. May not realize that, but at this point, there's companies like our sponsor Okta that does provide assistance to make sure that your institution can be secure and also improve usability. And with somebody like Campus Consortium, we can work with you because we get that higher ed space or the K through 12 space and how you would need to access that. So everybody can really use identity and access management, and it's important because everything really has been moving to the cloud. So many institutions have a cloud-first strategy now because cloud systems, services, and platforms are certainly available to many institutions. And so there is a growing dependency. The pandemic caused us to rely significantly on mobile learning and the mobile workforce. And in some institutions, in fact, in many that I've talked to, they're not going back. They're going to keep some of those processes, and the expectations are there from students and also from their workforce. And so they're going to keep some of these methods of accessing information and working online. It also, again, as I mentioned before, increases the usability and provides better service, certainly for students. And efficiency we talked about, and it's really critical in terms of security, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Just a few articles that are available in the news. EdTech magazine published in January, How to Choose an Identity and Access Management Solution for Higher Ed. EDUCAUSE, of course, has a robust source of information on their website, Identity and Access Management. And the Tambellini Group in April also published Why Identity Management is So Important in Education. So that's a setup for our excellent panel that we have today from two higher education institutions. Looking forward to hearing about them. I'd like to start out with continue with another poll question. How confident are you in your organization's ability to ensure users don't have excessive access privileges to data and information, and that your identity system is a priority for risk management and IT security? And that may be a bit lengthy. So really, are you using your identity system, if you have one, and is that tied into your IT security plan? And are you using it? Say, I've had to address, like from the auditors in the institutions I've been, leading IT in terms of who has access to what systems and what information. So we really need a system to kind of control that, especially to the sensitive information. Are you very confident, somewhat confident, or not very confident in your institution? And again, if you're not, that's okay. This is a learning session where we can, kind of learn more about how identity can help your security, as well as other aspects of your usability and organizing your information assets. I'd like to start out introducing our first speaker, but first the results of our poll. How confident are you in your organization's ability, in terms of identity and security? And it looks like most people are somewhat confident, and I would agree with that. I think everybody has taken steps, certainly in the past few years, in the light of the increasing cybersecurity threats to control access to information. There's a few schools I can see there, 13%. That certainly are, very confident, so they must have a robust system. And then certainly there's 26% that, well, we're not sure, and it's good that you're here so we can help orient you, with any kind of advice or information that you would need. So let me go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Paul Fisher. Paul has served Seton Hall University in the Teaching, Learning, and Technology Center since 1997, became the director in 2005, and was named the Associate Chief Information Officer in 2010. Paul is responsible for supporting Seton Hall in the thoughtful use and integration of technology into the curriculum and across functional business units. He provides direction for instructional design, digital media services, classroom and event support, user support, web development, technology strategy, and assessment. Paul, you have a full plate, and that's a lot to do. But the great thing is that you have a wonderful history with Seton Hall. And I'm going to hand it off to you to introduce Seton Hall, and love to hear about your experiences.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Carl, for asking me to be part of today's presentation. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always weird to hear stuff about myself, but I'll try to recover quickly. I think it is important to understand the lens at which I look at IDM and SSO. Specifically Okta, we are an Okta customer, and the technology that we utilize at the university. So, like Carl said, I've been here for more than 20 years supporting our faculty and students in the use of technology in their courses. I'm mostly responsible for what everybody would consider academic technology, and maybe a user support group if I had to lump them all into broader categories. But ultimately, I don't manage the infrastructure on a day-to-day basis, but I manage the user expectation and the user experience on a day-to-day basis. So it's sort of my job to understand what are the pain points at the university and all the stakeholders, and then brainstorm with my colleagues, across IT to figure out how do we make life better? How do we solve those quality of life issues on the campus? The slide in front of you has a little bit about Seton Hall, just so you understand, what we are. I think one of the differentiating factors for most campuses, this was not true 20 years ago, there's a lot more of us, but we are a one-to-one computing campus, which means we give a laptop to all of our undergraduate students as they come in. And I just sort of put that out there because it gives us a little bit of an advantage when we start talking about systems and standardization and things like that. They're all our machines, so we get to do lots of things to them to make life easier, both for IT and for the user base. University has a long, successful history using technology to enhance teaching and learning. But over the decades, if you look back, that scale was very imbalanced. All of our resources at one point were around, well, how do we make teaching and learning better? And focusing on the academic enterprise, while the business side of the enterprise wasn't getting as much attention. We were doing really cool stuff, focusing on learning outcomes, virtual reality, curriculum development, online courses, things like that. Over the last 5+ years, we've managed to bring that focus into more of a balance and try to bring more innovation on the technology side to the business of the university, to what our users interact with every day. Again, focusing on those quality of life issues pertaining to the access and use of technology on campus. We really want technology to be like the light switch. No one thinks about the light switch. No one says, oh, how do I use the light switch before I get into the classroom? They see it, they recognize it, they flick it, and light goes on. And that's really our end goal. I don't know if that will ever get there, but that's sort of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And all of those things have been made much easier with the proliferation of cloud solutions like Okta to help us modernize, not monetize, our IT stack and our business processes. So that's sort of the context by which I approach all this. So we go to the next slide, Carl. So the best way for me to sort of describe our journey is to tell a story. This was easier when I had younger kids because I was used to telling stories, but I'll do the best I can. Right. So I've already described. I would say the most important part of my job is to make sure our users are happy. They're satisfied. They're dare I use the word customers? I know that rings some bells in higher ed, but as a private institution dependent on tuition, our students pay a lot of money for the services that we deliver. We want them to be not only what they want and need, but we want them to be easy to use. So it's typical for the infrastructure and IT architect guys and girls to think about IDM and SSO, but it impacts the user experience so much that across all of IT, we took a deep dive, a little bit over 5 years ago to sort of reflect on what our pain points from our users were. And to see how do we address these, what technology made the most sense. So where we were at the time, we were at a place where our calls to the service desk, and as the person ultimately responsible for the service desk, were off the charts, and they were for very basic issues that at the time our experience as a consumer was much better. Right. So here I am paying, $5.99 for Google Music, and I can do things like, reset my own password, get notifications when somebody else logged in. But here I am spending X amount of dollars on tuitions and technology fees and things like that. And we were not having that, that same experience. So for us, users could only change their passwords when they were on campus. So what would happen when somebody was at a conference or was off for summer break? They didn't need to take summer classes, right? 40% of our students don't even come from New Jersey. So that was a real issue. And 9 times out of 10, we needed a text intervention over the phone to deal with it. So we were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars supporting something as unimportant as a password change. Our passwords were mostly insecure. We didn't have any real complexity rules. Certainly you could add a 1 or even repeat a password, but as long as you change it, it's all we cared about. And we had long expiration timelines if we had expiration timelines at all. And if you were trying to change your password and you weren't meeting the few policies that we had, our error messages were unclear. Like, well, why didn't that work? The system didn't tell you why it worked, just told you that it was an invalid password. We had no real visibility into what our users were doing. What was this application that we were spending $80,000 a year for actually getting used? Who could tell, right? All of our information was in disparate systems. And in order to do any real analysis, it took Herculean effort to export data, slice and dice what we were doing, and sort of try to get a picture of where our users were and what they were doing, and sort of keep that in mind later on in a slide when I talk about pandemic response. Our SSO at the time was homegrown. It was hard, if not almost impossible, to integrate with most modern systems, especially as we did move to a cloud first strategy. So we spent countless hours trying to integrate and doing troubleshooting. We would ultimately get there, but we were wasting hundreds of hours on something so trivial, rather than really doing something that might impact the university's business or the student experience. So and ultimately that homegrown system was not a single sign-on system. It was really a synchronized sign-on system. So we might go in our portal at the time from app to app, but you had to put in a username and password every time but it was the same username and password. So that was a plus, but not really truly a single sign-on. I think the light bulb went off in our heads when a colleague of mine were at a conference, and our then vendor of our vendor for our then identity management provider, we were in the middle of upgrading to their newest release, slapped my colleague on the back and said, "Hey, good luck with that. Let me know how it goes." Right. I just remember sort of looking at him and saying, "Oh, maybe we ought to be looking at something else." So that's where we were a few years ago. We can go to the next slide, Carl. And so we went into an assessment phase, right? What technology we really need, what problems do we really need it to solve? And we went into an evaluation process that ultimately led us back to Okta. And so these are just a couple of the reasons, that, the things that we were looking at in order to make our decision. Obviously, we wanted it cloud-based, right? Cloud first strategy. For the most part on the campus, we had migrated many of our critical systems. Blackboard was managed, hosted by Blackboard. We've moved Banner to our own cloud, but the Amazon cloud. So we were already moving many things off campus, and it seemed odd that the critical component, the single sign-on, the identity management, which is really giving everybody the access to the applications that they need, was still back on campus. And so when you start thinking about business continuity plans and disaster recovery and things like that, it made sense that our identity management system, our single sign-on solution, would be cloud-based, right? So octaCheck that box, and that's ultimately where we went. One of our biggest systems, the first system that we give everybody access to is their email, right? And our collaboration and productivity platform, and that's Office 365. We've been on Office 365 since they called it Exchange Labs way back in the day. But one of the things we didn't have was real-time Office 365 account provisionings. So students would get emails in their personal email account saying, "Hey, welcome to Seton Hall, you've been accepted," but they had to wait 3 days, right, for email and login credentials and things like that. So so ultimately, having that real-time integration with Office 365 was one of the, again, check boxes that Okta gave us. Their licensing model was affordable, it was easy to understand. It's based on the number of unique users that sign in a month, right? We weren't paying for users that weren't using the system. More and more, that's as our budgets get reduced, not just from a COVID perspective, but certainly that happened, but even before COVID, right? The eye on the IT budget as a percentage of overall university expenditures was always under a microscope. So, moving to a solution that we paid for what we consumed rather than paying for what we might consume was much more in our range than most other applications. So that checked another box. Well, at the time, and even still, believe it or not, password changes are still our number one call driver at the service desk. I don't quite understand it. We did experiment with, hey, we're not resetting your passwords anymore. You can do it yourself. And that didn't go over so well. So we've gotten back into it. But, our number one call driver was password resets back in the day. And again, it still is, but it's at a much lower volume. Our calls to service desk dropped about 50% once we implemented self-service password resets with Okta. And ultimately, we became much more like that consumer experience, right? We became much more, suddenly we had the technology like Google and Amazon, right? And Apple and some of the really big tech companies that are out there to handle it yourself. Next slide. So as we talk about some efficiency, usability, and security, we can now force some security, a better security posture to our user community. We can implement very complex passwords. So we have rules. We have a vocabulary set that they can't use the word Seton or pirate or their username or their last name, right? We now had a system that allowed us to become more complex in the things that we allowed and didn't allow our students to do. We were finally able to have security questions and text confirmations for people who needed to reset their passwords. So the system was handling it all in an automated fashion rather than a technician doing what they needed to do. I learned this actually from a retention committee that I've been on at the university for a long time, but never underestimate communicating with the student. And sort of, we take that principle the same way about communicating to the user, letting users know that a new device just signed in is so uberly important, because if I'm sitting at home in my lounge chair next to the pool and I get an alert that a new device signed in from, X IP address or location, and I don't know what that is, I'm immediately aware that I have a problem. We didn't have anywhere near that capability, before we implemented a real single sign-on IDM solution. And then, so that's alerting the end user. But now alerting, I was saying before how we really don't know where our users are at any given time, because all the data used to be in disparate systems. Well, now by funneling everybody through what we call the pirate dashboard, right? Because we're the Seton Hall Pirates, and ultimately that's Okta on underneath the covers, underneath the logo we put up there. We get an idea where our students are, what applications they're accessing, what devices they're using it on. So we have a lot more data on what our community is using to access technology on the campus. And it allows us to alert our security professionals, right? So our IT security team around things like Paul logged into New Jersey 6 minutes ago and in Mexico, just now. Well, we know that that's an impossibility. So ultimately we're alerting the users and our IT security team to start figuring out what do all those things mean. So the other thing that we got was a time to market, right? Everybody wants a technology solution to solve their problem on campus. It's not always the case because they never want to change their business processes. I'm sure I'll get lots of nods from my IT colleagues on the call. But ultimately, by having single sign-on, I don't worry about users anymore. I don't worry about people, giving people too much access to a particular application, or allowing for simple password rules or simple password policies that never expire, because they're mine, right? So we've even moved to the point where it is now a required, right? It is a requirement. If you're bringing up a new piece of technology at Seton Hall, if it does not utilize single sign-on, then you cannot purchase the technology solution. And that ultimately gives us a much greater security posture. And maybe even more importantly, at the end of someone's life cycle at Seton Hall, when they leave, we get to turn them off from one place. We don't have to track down the dozens and dozens of disparate systems that we might not manage into into removing an employee or a student or what have you. So it's really made it's increased our security posture. It's made our efficiencies much better. So we can go to the next slide, Carl. So, ultimately, what did it allow us to do? What did it allow us to do in March 2020 when we got the order to go home for 2 weeks? Right in the first 2 weeks, we're like, oh, well, we can manage this. People can figure out what they need to do. But as the truth started to reveal itself that we're going to be home for much longer time, we had legacy applications. And not only legacy applications, but applications that had sensitive data in it that we didn't make accessible from off campus on purpose. Not that we couldn't, but when we architected the solution, our medical education simulation system in particular, when we implemented that solution, we particularly said, we don't want anybody to be able to see this off campus, because it's got video of our allied health and our School of Medicine students practicing what they learn, and that could be a problem if something ever leaked out. But so mixing Okta single sign-on solution and its dashboard allowed us to pair that with Amazon AppStream to wrap those legacy on-campus only applications into a very secure wrapper, and immediately push it out to the groups that needed it because of the way Okta is integrated with Active Directory and the rest of our systems on campus. So that really gave us a very rapid response to take things like our Windows shared drives that are used in lots of automatic processes around the campus, our medical simulation and some other services, and push that out to people who were now basically home, and we never planned them to be. I think the other thing that it allow us to do is, because that could get confusing, what app do I use? Do I use the AppStream app, or do I use the regular app, depending on where you are? Okta allows us to say, oh, they're on campus, give them this app. And when that same user logs in from off campus, we'll give them the one that allows them to do it remotely without giving them two, right? So our users never really saw the difference in whether they were on campus or off campus. And we certainly could not have achieved that without a platform that was both cloud-based and clearly tied into, all of our systems. We can go to the next slide, Carl. So ultimately, we were the Okta dashboard is really our portal, right? And higher ed has held on to our content portals for a long time, and nobody ever really uses them the way we figure they would. I'm sure there's some best practices out there, but from our perspective, it's always been an IT project instead of really a campus project, which means our portal was looked at as a list of links to get where we needed to go. So we were able to actually deprovision a portal that was no longer maintained by its owner, was onerous for us to maintain from a staff perspective. And we, with Okta's help, we were able to accomplish a authenticated web page that delivered components based on your role that was being delivered from the Okta single sign-on platform. So it really allowed us to stop supporting an application that was old, not moving forward. It allowed us to really get a handle on shadow IT apps with our policy around single sign-on. We discovered probably maybe 12.5 applications that we didn't know were even out there that people were signing out for. The cloud is great, but it also means anybody with a credit card can be their own IT shop. So it really enables us to understand user behavior, to bring access to systems that are anywhere, and helps us to better deliver a consistent experience to the university community. So that's sort of our journey on the IDM SSO Okta story for one campus in the Northeast.
Well, that's a great story. Just had a few comments there, but first I'd like to roll this next and last poll question. Do students, faculty, and staff have the ability to authenticate to one system one time and then access multiple applications without having to enter their name and password again? Yes, maybe, no. And if the audience attendees could please respond to the poll, be interested in hearing about your institution's ability for single sign-on, as Paul described in his presentation. Paul, also, passwords will never go away. That support, I hear you, and the idea of passwords and needing assistance. You can put all those questions out there, but a lot of users do contact help desk still to get that support. But I know Okta and other companies and vendors are working toward passwordless authentication. And so I don't know if you've been able to, think about maybe changing that to that.
Yeah, we dream about that day, and it's sort of a combination of a few things. I know it's on the roadmap for some vendors. We've thought about going back to the days of a dongle, right?
Yeah.
Everybody remembers back in the day, that's how they did software licensing. If you didn't have the dongle, you couldn't open a piece of software. And perhaps I'm dating myself a little bit, but if I have a dongle hanging off the side of my computer, or I plug it in even to a public computer, then the possession is sort of the identity, but nobody's comfortable with that either. We did manage to roll out two-factor authentication. So our single sign-on platform integrates with Twofactor. We are actively looking at switching the factors so that if I have my phone and I get the push from the Okta app and I click approve, I'm not going to ask for your password, right? Because you have your phone. What are the odds somebody stole your phone? Now, of course, it's like radar detectors, right? You buy a radar detector that has these 4 protocols. Well, now they come out with a new protocol, so you have to buy the new radar detector. So every time we go down this route of figuring it out, the hackers, or the bad guys, as we like to call them, are going to figure out a way around it. So,
Right.
but passwordless is something that we look forward to very much.
Well, hopefully that'll cut down on those help desk tickets in the future, but that remains to be seen, I guess. But thank you, Paul. It was a great presentation. Really appreciate the insight to your journey. And the poll results have come back from our last question about institutions using the ability to authenticate one time and access multiple systems. And I'd say the reactions between yes and no were pretty much evenly divided at about 20% apiece. But most folks, as we've seen, 23% kind of probably have a mixture of some, like maybe they get all their critical systems or single sign-on, but then there's a handful of other systems that aren't yet integrated. And I think that's really the advantage of getting within a platform that can integrate any new systems that come along. And as you said, Paul, you're not even looking at applications to bring into Seton Hall without, first saying, hey, can we integrate this into our single sign-on? So I want to thank you for that presentation, and I want to thank the audience for responding to the poll questions. Provides all of us with a bit of insight about where institutions are currently with identity. I'd like to introduce our second speaker, James Shuttlesworth. James is the Director of Network Systems and Infrastructure at Ursinus College. James develops the standards, directions, and initiatives for the college's systems and applications and their underlying technologies, including core infrastructure and network connectivity. And James, I want to hand it over to you to talk a little bit about Ursinus and tell us about your journey and experience with identity and access management.
Sure. So if you haven't heard of Ursinus, we are a small liberal arts college about 40 minutes outside of Philadelphia. Primarily residential. We're over 90% of the students living on campus. And as an organization, our identity is very much on close personal relationships between our students and our faculty, and by proxy our staff as well. So maintaining a very personalized and custom experience for as many of the students as we can is something that guides a lot of our decisions. Making sure that we're doing everything we can for the students to feel like they're getting the experience that they deserve at Ursinus College, and I think that's not unique to us. So I did want to thank Paul for going first, because I can say pretty much just ditto everything he said applies to us. So I don't have a whole lot of extra to talk about, but I can talk about really why Okta worked for us at the time that we deployed it, how it works in a smaller setting, a smaller IT shop, a smaller university than Seton Hall had. And really a couple of the key impetuses that brought us to do that. So if you go to the next slide. So we've deployed Okta about 2015, give or take. And Hurricane Sandy was something that hit the Philadelphia region pretty hard. Ursinus escaped largely unscathed, but a number of our peer institutions suffered periods where they lost power for days on end. Their IT systems eventually ground to a halt over that time. And although everybody was dealing with a whole lot of stuff and they weren't necessarily worried about the IT systems, as IT systems become so tightly wound into emergency response, communication response, it was no longer acceptable to say that those are secondary priorities. They're very much key priorities to have at time of a crisis. So we were looking very hard at what are the systems that we absolutely have to have working in order to survive those kinds of crises. And the one, probably the most critical system to have up and running is authentication. You can't log in, it doesn't matter if the application's up and running, people can't get at the data. So making sure that we can actually get into all of those systems was the first problem that we wanted to really get a handle on. We had been using LDAP. We had what I used to call single sign-on, but what we wanted to get to what Paul was mentioning, which we call seamless sign-on, the ability to move from app to app seamlessly with as much of the visual identity carried through. So as you flow from one application to another, and at least in some cases, maybe you're unaware that you're doing it. You just know that you're getting to the data and the assets and the resources that you have. So trying to get that done was important. And then the last item we were trying to deal with is that we are a fairly small IT staff. We have fewer than 20 members in the IT department. So we don't have a lot of people dedicated to specific tasks. And we looked at options that were available at the time, are still available. Things like Shibboleth, things like ADFS, and other identity providers that would have been more commercial relationship. And we felt like almost all of those would have required a specialist, somebody who that was their skill set, that was the kind of thing that they really wanted to have as driving them. So we didn't have the resources to take that on. We needed something that was going to be supported by multiple people, easy to learn from an IT staff standpoint, and easy to maintain going forward as we go through. So all of that led us eventually to select Okta. We did bring in things like lifecycle management into the product. One of the additional challenges we face is onboarding our new students. Again, since we are talking again about having a very personalized and one-on-one experience with students, the way that they first get into our IT systems is actually a fairly important part of that onboarding process. You again want to make sure that they feel connected to the college, that they're being brought on in a friendly and easy to do way. And we were able to leverage the API in Okta, which is a really robust API, to integrate that into our admission CRM system to get those emails triggered out, get them customized, make them look friendly, and get them logged in and get their password created in a way that was really seamless. And that transitioned us from sending postal mail, which is how we were doing it at the time, to send those credential sets to them. And that was really not a good way of doing it for a whole lot of reasons. The universal directory and was another piece of it. Similar to what Paul was mentioning with the portal, is really just bringing those applications on, and making sure that all of those applications are easy to find for people. We found a lot of cases, students not as much, but definitely with staff, a lot of staff were unaware of applications that were available to them to use, or in some cases that they really needed to use to perform their jobs. And they would onboard and sometimes really struggle to find those applications. So providing that kind of universal directory of applications, universal directory of people and roles really makes all of that flow much more seamlessly without the IT department having to do a lot of training and a lot of one-on-one time with people to get them up and running, although we still do that to a degree. It just makes it more efficient. We did have ADFS implemented initially. It checked a lot of these boxes too. It was available. It was free, which is or just part of our Microsoft agreement, which is a compelling thing. But what we found with it is that it really wasn't resilient. We had situations where ADFS would go offline briefly, usually for hardware faults or anything like that. And even though we could run multiple ones, it still resulted in user disruption. And that was something we were really trying to avoid. So we wanted something like Okta, who at the time boasted 5 nines of reliability and have proven it out. We've been with them for 6 or 7 years now, I think, and I don't recall a single outage. or any kind of downtime with Okta in that whole time. So they've been really, really solid on that front. So you can go to the next slide. So when we went with Okta, we were actually under a deadline because part of the project was those welcome letters I had mentioned earlier. We were under a deadline to deploy this solution in time to welcome in our incoming freshman class, which is something we traditionally do in the spring. So there was a really aggressive implementation schedule. We actually started the project, I believe, in January, and we completed the rollout and cut over to Okta during spring break. In just a couple of days, really. It took a lot of preparation work to get to that point, but the cutover went really, really smoothly. Users didn't have any real issues. And at the time, I think we brought in about 8 applications. The key one being our LMS. At the time is still Canvas, integrated perfectly into it. Office 365 we brought in at the same time. Along with provisioning. We also brought in provisioning that worked quite well. And we brought on elements of our student information system, which is Colleague, Web Advisor, and their gateway application were brought in at the same time. So the implementation, to cut over something like that over spring break was something that made me personally really anxious. It's not the kind of time of year you really want to do something like that. Students, although they may not be on campus, are still using our systems at that time. But it couldn't have gone better, and we got really great support from Okta's professional services at the time to make that transition. So I will say that from that transition 8 years ago, or seven or 8 years ago, and 8 applications, we've actually now grown. One of the really great things about bringing in Okta is the ease at which you can get new applications brought online. We are now at, I think, about 56 applications integrated into Okta. So it's amazing when you find all of the little 1s, 2s applications that people use that Okta can integrate with so many of them. And we've got Adobe to Zoom. We're covering the whole alphabet of all the different applications that are out there. And usually can get a new application online with Okta in about 2 hours. Sometimes more, depends on the app vendor you're working with, but it really is a pretty painless experience to bring in new applications and provision them out. So also, just to talk a bit more about provisioning people and the concept of constituencies, which is something that has really helped with providing access and getting people into that least provisioned application case. We have been able to integrate Okta as well with our student information system, which is our key system of record. And we're able to define constituent groups in our student information system and have them flow right into Okta. And then when we're assigning and provisioning applications, we can actually use those groups and use those roles to assign the applications that are relevant to that person. Down to the degree where we can assign Adobe licenses to students based on their enrollment in classes and things like that. And that just happens automatically. So the registrar puts that student in a class, they get those licenses. No IT intervention involved, which can really, really streamline start of semester work and making sure that students are promptly getting access to the things that they need. We are moving to the cloud like everybody, and the identity management solution there is really, again, a critical piece. We don't say no to applications that can't integrate with Okta, but we find very few that can. And we push back pretty strongly if that's something that we're facing. Increasingly, though, it's less of an issue than it was 4 or 5 years ago. We find that most will get on board, although sometimes with a small fee to do it. And we've been moving really regularly towards getting as many of the legacy on-site applications into the cloud as we possibly can, as we're able. Right, and that's pretty much sums up this slide as well. We're moving everything to the cloud virtually and making sure that everybody can get what they need at home. And largely we got through the pandemic pretty successfully for that reason. We were well prepared for it. Okta made it very easy.
Right. James, thanks for that story. Sounds like, again, big lift and shift on your side, kind of migrating from the systems and methods that you were using before into a cloud-based system. And you said you included provisioning in there as well, correct? That was part of the...
Yeah, we provision several applications now. At the time we launched, we only deployed provisioning for Office 365. Okta's 365 provisioning functionality is pretty robust, and
Right.
they've got it down really well, so that worked well. But we do provision, I think, 3 or 4 other applications as well directly through Okta, including Zoom is the other large one that really works well.
All right, I got a question probably for either of you or both of you. Jim Anderson asks, how do your users ensure they are logged out of all platforms available through Okta? Perhaps they're handling their laptop to a friend to use, or to their child to watch a video or to play a game.
I can take that. There are logout capabilities, but we actually hide them typically because the most reliable way to make sure that people are logged out is to close any open web browser windows. The seamless sign-on that is an issue is that it will persist using cookies pretty easily through browser windows and even separate windows in the same browser. So typically we advise them to make sure that they close their browser windows. In our computer labs, that's the desktop even. Make sure you log out, make sure you close your browser windows before you walk away from the computer. So.
Great. All right, very good. Well, the rest of the questions, we'll gather those up. We'll send them to our panelists today. I really want to thank Paul and James for joining us and sharing their stories of implementing identity in their campuses. And I want to thank the many, many institutions and other organizations who attended today for our EdTalk. If you have any questions, we can provide support to you. That is our mission, to help you access technology that you need. We have access to many partners and vendors at Campus Consortium. Please welcome a informational email or call with us, and we will get you connected to the resources that you need. So again, thanks everyone for attending today. Much appreciated. Paul, James, thank you. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. And both of you, thanks for attending on move-in day at your institutions. I mean, they have done a lot to be here, folks. So thank you for taking the time. Much appreciated.